Thank you all for coming out tonight to hear a little bit about the initiated issues which are going to be on the ballot in Shaker Heights this fall on November 7th, just a few weeks from now. There are actually three issues that relate to Shaker Heights. The first one is the library issue, and it's a repeat of the issue that was on 1 year ago. It's an effort to transfer the Shaker Heights Public Library to the county library system, and that issue was defeated, I think, as most of you recall, by a margin of 83% to 17% last year. The second issue that's on the ballot is an alternate proposal to the city's plan at Shaker Town Center. And the third issue on the ballot is a proposed rollback of 5.5 mils of real property taxes, which would reduce city revenues by $2.6 million each and every year. So we've got three issues on the ballot. The library issue will be number 55, the Shaker Town Center issue will be number 44, and the tax rollback issue will be number 39. And then there'll be some state and county issues that come before these issues. Let me deal first with the Shaker Town Center issue. Those of us who have stood for election in this city since the 70s, as I have, recall that every 2 years our community would say to us, "What are you going to do about Shaker Town Center?" And starting around 1980, a number of public improvements were made. The sidewalks, the curbs, the lighting, benches, rear parking, access to the rear parking, reducing the meters in the front to free 30 minutes. And still, people said, "What are you going to do about Shaker Town Center?" And then later on in the 1980s, at a time when we had some federal funding, we offered storefront renovation grants. But they weren't very popular, so they didn't have much of an impact. Very few people took advantage of them. Only 8, and most of those were on Lee Road. So that storefront or facade renovation was not really very attractive as far as the people who were working there are concerned. We have had, during that same period for over 10 years, a person on the city payroll, commercial areas coordinator, first Irv Lackritz, and then later on Dave Hart, whose job was basically to work with the Merchants Association, try to help them do publicity, common area promotion, special events, help on bringing in new tenants. And that didn't have much of an impact. So it was that type of a background that led me, in response to repeated demands from citizens in our community, to appoint the special committee under Dave Goss. They studied the matter, and 9 months later, in February 1987, that's 2.5 years ago, they came out with a recommendation that is basically the plan that we are following today. And that plan was then subjected to a number of public meetings, try to get as much public input as we can. It went to the Planning Commission for hearings. It had review by a very well-known outside municipal real estate consultant from Chicago. And ultimately, in November 1987, almost 2 years ago, the council decided to go forward with that plan. Now, what is that plan? Basically, the proposal is to deal with all 4 quadrants around the Chagrin-Lee intersection. First was the southwest quadrant. That's where the new Blauschild building is today. And the Blauschild building was built on property which the city previously acquired and had torn down the buildings, and then had, in its planning process, come up with the conclusion that that area west of Lee Road should be primarily automotive. Requests for proposals were put out, a competition was held, Blauschild was ultimately selected, and the city transferred the real property to him, and he went ahead and developed that very, very nice showroom on that corner. Across the street, on the northwest quadrant, where the library and Moreland School are, at the time that the Citizens Committee was working on it, the schools had not yet made a decision about elementary school reorganization. So the recommendation of the Citizens Committee at that time was that the city should acquire as much property as it could in the area that's bounded by Moreland School on Van Aken, all the property on Lee Road except the library, and the property down Chagrin as far as the Nissan automobile showroom. That's an 11-acre parcel. We have put out some requests for proposals for potential residential development in that arena. It either wasn't the right time or that wasn't the right project. We weren't satisfied with it, and we will continue to do planning for that area. But in the meantime, since the council adopted the plan 2 years ago, the city has acquired all the properties in that 11-acre parcel, with the exception of the library. Then we get to the northeast quadrant, the area on the north side of Chagrin between Lee and Avalon. And the proposal of the committee, first put out in February '87, was that the city should acquire all the property on that north side, tear down the buildings, offer them to a private developer, and have a private developer with his own funds build a brand new strip shopping center. And that's the plan that we have gone forward with. And in the meantime, we have now selected a developer after a very spirited competition, which fact tells us that within the private development sector, there's a great deal of confidence in the likelihood of success of a retail shopping center at this location. We have reached agreement very successfully, as far as we're concerned, with 2 key merchants in the area, which will become the anchors of the proposed new facility. They will be Heinen's, which is pictured here on the west end. This is close to Lee Road. And this is a proposed 40 to 45,000 square foot grocery store, which is more than twice as big as the present Heinen's. It's about the same size as the new Heinen's just opened out on Lander Circle. On the east end, up toward Avalon, will be Shaker Hardware. Now, those negotiations with those 2 people went on for a long time, and they were very difficult. But we tried very hard to respond to a very strong outpouring of community demand that said we should have these 2 people in our new shopping center. And we certainly heard from our community on that point, and we tried to pay attention to it. And we're very pleased that they will be the anchors. This is a plot plan. Here again is the Heinen store down close to Lee Road, and this space right here is where Shaker Hardware will be, and that is its present location. It is the only store that will remain in its present location. You can note from both the picture and this plot plan that the parking is in front, because the experts in shopping centers said shoppers like to see front parking. They want to see where they can put their car, and they want to know where the entrance to the store is in relationship to where they're going to park. And that's a key part of this. So the parking will be in front, and it will be landscape, which is what the green represents. There'll be no parking in the back, as there is currently. This will back right up to the Winslow extension on the back here. One of the principal advantages of this type of development is that the entire shopping center will be under the control of a single owner. That's the way it is at Van Aken Center and Shaker Plaza, for example. So that you can have not only a common looking building where everything is designed to go together, but you can have a policy with regard to tenants. You can put the right tenants in to produce the desired mix, instead of just have whoever might come along and who may do no good for a particular shopping center. You can have an effective merchants association. You can have a common advertising policy. And the reason that you're able to do it is that those clauses go into the tenants' leases, and they have to do it. Right now, there are no such requirements, and the merchants association simply, in spite of all the efforts we've made and they've made, has never been very effective. We can have an effective merchants association. This will have a covered walkway, which you can see here. You can go from one end to the other without having to worry too much about rain and snow. In the center at this point, which shows up right here on this plot, is a glass-roofed walkway through to the back, so people coming in from the back area will be able to have access there. This is a project which we consider to be very exciting, very attractive, and something which we think will finally meet the demands of our citizens that's been expressed to us for every 2 years for the last 12 or 15 years about doing something about Shakertown Center. This will do something, and it will have a dramatic effect. Now, you may notice that I didn't say anything about the south side of the street, the area right across from the new area, the southeast quadrant. The plan that was submitted by the Citizens Committee back in February of 1987 said, yes, we may have to do a little bit about the parking. We may have to do some improvement. We may have to open it up a little bit. But by and large, let's leave that to the private sector. And if we do something nice like this across the street, then the south side, in due course, should become very attractive to potential new owners and merchants who can do significant upgrades of the south side as well. And we have already seen in a short time that that proposition is very likely to happen. Because if you look down on Lee Road, right next to Blauschild, you will see an example of what we're talking about. Next to Blauschild, going south on Lee Road, is the Zalad Pontiac Oldsmobile facility. They just doubled the size of their showroom on Lee Road. It's twice as big as it was. Next to that used to be a vacant automobile dealership, which has not been in use for a while. I say used to be because that building was just recently torn down. That property has been acquired by Firestone, and they are going to build a brand new car care facility there. And that project is already underway. If you go a couple doors south to the corner of Hampstead, the old Diety Wash building, that property is in the process of being sold to a car wash, which will make a $1.5 million investment in that area. So that's part of why we think that's 3 examples what we think can happen with this kind of a plan. Now, the alternate plan against this proposition, a few people decided a short time ago, earlier May or so of this year, that they wanted to do something different. And we believe that this alternate plan is basically coming from a few of the merchants who are not likely to be in the new center. Now, we knew when we started that we were going to have some people who disagreed with us. We knew that this kind of opposition was likely, but if we want progress, we can't please everybody. And these merchants decided that they'd like to stay where they are. They like the quarters that they have. So they proposed a plan which essentially leaves all the buildings exactly where they are. It doesn't tear anything down, but they do recognize a few things. Something needs to be done at Shakertown Center. Something needs to be done which requires a large expenditure of funds, and they'd like the city to be the one to pay that money. So to that extent, it's similar, and they agree with us in some of the premises. But they would like to keep all the buildings and all the stores in their same present location. So they'll put new facades on all the buildings, and then they'll fix up the back parking, and they may even put covered walkways across the back so that the back entrances would be more attractive. Now, we've costed out that proposal, and we believe that the alternate proposal will cost about the same thing that the city has to spend in acquiring this property and tearing it down. But that plan doesn't have any private investment. It only has city expenditures, about the same amount that we would be spending anyway. This plan has a private developer who's got to spend $7 to $8.5 million to put this up. And beyond that, the city will have an interest in the rents and in the profit on sale of that building, shopping center within the 25-year period of our contract with the developer. So over that 25 years, we will recover much of the dollars that we have to put out for this project. Under the alternate plan, there is no such recovery. So the long and short of it is that this project involves a total expenditure of about twice what the alternate one does, but the city expenditure would be about the same. Obviously, it doesn't the alternate plan doesn't do anything about centralization of management, improving the problem of front parking. It doesn't provide a 40,000 square foot grocery store. It doesn't permit an upgraded drugstore. It doesn't do any of those things. That is the alternate proposal. The ballot issue, number 44. If you vote yes, you get the alternate proposal. If you vote no, you get the city proposal. In spite of all the funds and all the accounts that we have, which are required for municipal financial accounting purposes, we can really think of things in only 3 or 4 categories. One, the dollars that as of year end are committed because we've issued purchase orders for products or goods. We have contracts out for purchase of goods. That's what we call encumbered funds, and that was $1.9 million as of the end of the year. Then let's look at, we could group these funds in 3 basic categories: restricted funds, capital funds, and our general operating funds. Now, the restricted funds, by that I mean monies which in many cases come from special sources like special assessments, gasoline tax, and so forth. They are the pension fund. We have a police and fire pension fund that's mandated by law. We have a street and highway fund. That's where the gasoline tax revenues that we get go. We have debt service funds to pay off 1979 bond issues. We have trust and agency funds. That's money we're holding that is not necessarily ours. We have special assessments for street lighting and tree trimming. We have charges on the quarterly sewer bill that go into the sewer fund. In each case, those monies can be used only for that specific purpose. You can't transfer the money to any other fund, and you can't use it for general government purposes. You can't pay police salaries with that money. You can only use it for those particular purposes. And that was about $2.7 million at the end of the year. Now, I've grouped together with that, with the restricted funds, the self-insurance reserve. Now, in 1986, at the height of the insurance crisis, we found that we could not get certain types of coverage anymore. Just couldn't buy it anywhere. We also found that our premiums were skyrocketing. We had a premium billed to us or suggested to us of $500,000 for $1 million policy. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And so by and large, the city in 1986 became a self-insurer. When we talked to our insurance consultants, they said that if we had insurance, it should be in the range of $10 to $18 million. They said if we had a self-insurance reserve fund, it should be in the range of, say, $4 million or higher, up to, say, $10 million, in that range. We have taken the annual premiums that we paid for insurance, about $260,000 a year, since 1986, and put it in an insurance reserve fund. We're up, as of the end of last year, to $620,000. We need, for that kind of protection, to be somewhere up to $4 million. Those funds, essentially, then, are set aside and can't really be used for general government. The next major fund is the capital fund. And we mentioned before that the money in the capital fund comes from estate taxes, the taxes paid by Shaker residents who have died. It doesn't come from property taxes, it doesn't come from income taxes. And out of that fund, we basically do infrastructure improvements, streets and curbs. We do major equipment purchases, large trucks. We do major building repairs, park repairs, and so forth. As of the end of 1988, we had over $7 million in the capital fund. And the various projects that had already been committed were about $2.4 million. That left $4.7 million. That's the fund that the council determined several years ago to start setting aside for commercial area redevelopment. Now remember, we had no federal funds for that, and we can't borrow money for that. So the only way we could finance it is to save it up. What that means is that the money that was here, which council has been setting aside for several years to use for Shaker Town Center, plus 1989 estate tax receipts, by the end of this year are committed. When we take this money away, we also lose the interest that we've been earning on these savings. So starting next year, our interest income is going to be down about $500,000 just by having spent these capital funds. The only other major fund is the general fund. That is the fund that almost all of our government operations run through. That's what council spends 3 months in the first quarter of every year carefully reviewing, is the budgets submitted by department heads for their annual operations. And that has gone through very carefully. Last year, we are talking about a general fund budget, general fund expenditures of about $20 million. What does that mean then when we say at the end of 1988 we had $6 million left over in the general operating fund? That means it's about 30% of the $20 million. It's approximately 3.5 months of our expenditures. That is, I submit, the only proper focus for the question of whether the city has any extra money or not. Some funds are needed at the end of the year, and you can argue about how much they should be. But if you try to take $2.6 million out of that, and then put together also the fact that there's going to be a loss of interest, you can see that divide this into here, and you're finished in less than 2 years. We don't have $6 million extra every year. That's not what happens. This fund has been built up over a long period of time, probably over 10 years. Last year, in 1989, we had an excess of revenues over expenditures of something in excess of 1% of our expenditures. More than that, when we look at how that's been over the last 4 years, each year it's been declining to get down to that 1%, the excess of our revenues over expenditures. We don't take in a large amount of extra money every year. Last year it was about $259,000 extra in a budget of $19 to $20 million. So if you start taking this out, you can see very quickly that that fund will run right down. That's $6 million. It'll run right down to zero and keep going. You can't take 2.6 plus 500,000 out of $6 million very many times. So you just can't take that much money out. Now you'll note that I have said nothing about what kind of budgetary pressures we expect in the future. And this situation here does not portray anything of what we expect to happen next year or the subsequent years. And I think when you put that in there, it becomes even clearer that you can't take that much money out without a significant consequence. We expect our tax revenues to go up a little each year by inflation. Certainly our expenditures go up a little each year by inflation, but they stay about the same. So the only thing we have to worry about are the new items, the new burdens that are thrust upon us as a city. Well, we got the first one right over Labor Day, our solid waste disposal contract. We've had for a long time 3-year waste disposal contracts. The contractor would only bid 1 year. And his price went up from $22 a ton to $36 a ton. And the reason he only bid 1 year is next year it'll go up again, perhaps by as much. And it doesn't take a lot of looking around to know that there are far fewer landfills available today than there were a few years ago, and it is very hard to find a site for a new one. And what that means is that the cost of landfills is going to skyrocket in the next few years. We have health care insurance cost increase, which we believe will kick in at a cost of about $400,000 more next year than this year, and that may go up in the following year as well. We are mandated by state law to have a waste reduction program by 1992, which involves recycling. Recycling doesn't make money, folks. It costs money, and that money we would estimate is going to be at least as big an increase as the solid waste disposal costs. So, putting those on top of this situation, this city council is going to have to worry about what it's going to do for the future. Even without the rollback, it's going to have to worry about what it's going to do for the future. And if that rollback goes through, we have no choice but to begin to cut services, and begin very promptly, like within the 1990 budget. That's where it'll have to be. And when we start looking at service cuts, we have to face one of the basic realities of municipal government. It's a service business. 70+% of our budget goes to personnel costs. In the police department and fire department, it's 90+% to personnel cost. We will have to continue to deliver basic services. We have to pick up the garbage, we have to provide fire and rescue squad service, we have to provide police service. But we don't have to do it the way it's being done now. We can pick up the garbage from the front lawn, not from backyards. Estimated savings, $750,000, $850,000, somewhere in that range. Compare that against this figure, and it tells you right away that isn't going to do it. We got to keep going. We have to provide rescue squad service. We don't have to provide 2 rescue squads. We don't have to provide 2 rescue squad response in the east end of the community. We don't have to transport to hospitals of choice. We can take patients to the nearest hospital. In the police arena, we have to have uniformed policemen out, but we don't have to have an undercover force. And that group has grown from 2 to 8 in recent years. And if we take them away, I think personally that they've had a major impact on the significant reduction of crime we've seen in the last couple of years. And I think if we take them away, we may see increases in burglary, we may see increases in auto and bike theft, because that's where that undercover group basically concentrates. The question of what happens to these services, you can see impacts what I think is the primary quality that typifies Shaker Heights. It has provided a top level of services as long as people can remember. We can provide services at a much lower level, but that's not the Shaker Heights that we all know and have been used to for decades and decades. It's a far different city, and I think that really is what the issue is before the voters.
The library, Shaker Town Center, and the tax rollback issues will all appear on the ballot in Shaker Heights on November 7th. We urge you to vote in that election.